Everybody, welcome to a Mobile Nations podcast, an actual, for real, genuine Mobile Nations podcast where we have got the entire gang, the entire band back together. I'm going to introduce everybody because it's been so long you've probably forgotten who we are. First, we have Daniel Rubino from Windows Phone Central. Hey, Dan.
Hey, everybody. How you doing? Good morning.
We have Derek Kessler from Mobile Nations itself.
I forgot who I am, too.
We have, can I still call you CrackBerry Kevin Mitchelluk?
You can for now.
Awesome. And Android Phil Nickinson from Android Central. How are you, Phil?
That's totally not my name at all.
Yeah, you never got the awesome Kevin-style nickname going on Android Central.
I'm okay with that.
All right, so we're going to start off with Phil. First, because he is time limited today, and also because his site has probably been as active as 900 other normal-sized sites combined. Phil, you've gotten 300 new phones since we last spoke to you?
No, that was just since Friday.
Oh. So what's the big deal? What's the new thing in Android world? Is it KitKat? Is it the Note 3? Is it the upcoming Nexus 5? What's the important stuff?
Android's funny because we get teasers, and then so we actually have like 2 tracks of new stuff, right? So yeah, we have Android 4.4 KitKat coming out eventually. I have no idea what's in it. Like
chocolate and biscuits.
Well, and to Google's credit, we've seen just really drippy leaks, like nothing good. So everyone's kind of fighting over those scraps. Yeah, I don't know. Something's coming. And then at the same time, we have all these new devices coming out with 4.3. You've got the Galaxy Note 3, and you've got a new tablet from Samsung. HTC is about to drop some new stuff on us. LG's got new stuff. I mean, like, everybody is still coming out with almost completely current new phones. I mean, 4.4 is not out yet, so we can't really call it, the current version of Android. Yeah, there's just, the machine does not stop. And there's no getting off this ride. I asked. They won't let me.
So, Phil, everybody wants to know, what's the phone in your pocket right now?
I have no phone in my pocket right now.
What's the phone that you're currently using as your daily driver?
I don't know. I got to pick one here. So mostly the Moto X. Love the size. I don't even remember what the size is. I think it's 4.8. That sounds about right.
Smaller than all the others.
But, yeah, slightly smaller to hold than the S4 or HTC One.
Yeah, no, it's got the same screen size as the Nexus 4, but the phone itself is smaller. So it feels really great. In fact, I've got one here.
Got it. So is that a custom creation you built?
Yeah, so that's the other thing. If you get it on AT&T and eventually on other carriers, you will be able to customize it and get your own color. All right, Rene being frozen in time next to me is really creeping me out.
Yeah, he's just like so still. It's amazing.
I actually don't even know if this is still broadcasting, to be honest, because he's the host. So.
Oh dear. No, it's very, very good. It's not perfect.
My question, at least, it has a lot of compromises. The camera's gotten better, but it's not the highest density screen. It's not the biggest screen. What makes the Moto X so popular that a lot of people who are really smart about Android like it anyway?
Hang on, are you trying to imply that some of the specs people hold so near and dear to them are not actually as important as they like to think they are?
Yes!
Yeah, no, I mean, so it's got a 720p display, but at 4.8 inches, it's not horrible, and it actually looks pretty good. It's not the best display, but I have not once used this phone and wished that I had a different one because of the display. Yeah, the camera is probably the biggest compromise, and honestly, I'm getting a little fed up of sitting through all these manufacturer briefings when they explain how this is the best camera since the last camera, and then lo and behold, we actually try to use it, and it's just not. I get it's their job to pimp these products, but don't lie to me. Don't show me example pictures that are great when I'm going to, 10 minutes later start taking pictures and know right away that it's just not as good as you were just telling me it was. That said, it's kind of an outlier in that department, right? Samsung has really good cameras. LG has really good cameras. HTC has really good cameras. This is passable, but just barely at this point.
So when you look at that, then you look at the Galaxy Note 3 that just came out, and you look at the HTC Max that's been advertised. How do people know what specs are important for them on Android and which ones they shouldn't focus? Like, what should they be focusing on when they pick the next Android phone?
I will tell them. I think the more important specs, I think, are almost the physical ones. How big is the phone? How big is the display? I mean, you can get into and we talk a lot about this in Talk Mobile. You can get into which processor is better, but we really have kind of plateaued. And I don't even remember I remember what processor's in here, but I can't tell a difference between this X8 system Motorola is using and Snapdragon 600 or 800 or even an S4 Pro. I mean, where you get the big differences now is in battery life, and then so much else is software customization.
So, and the other thing that seems to have, when people talk about the currency of Android, like it's, whether it's running 4.3 or not, it seems like that story just hasn't changed year after year. If you get an HTC or a Samsung device, you're not going to get timely updates. If you get a Nexus, are we past the point where we should care about having the latest operating system on Android?
I think we've been far past that. It's just been an issue of convincing everybody, especially once we got up to like Android 4.1, 4.2. It hasn't made quite as big a difference. It's not to say it's not important. It's not to say that the manufacturer shouldn't be held to supporting devices and keeping as current as they can. But I get that it's a tough battle and it's not easy to do, and I think Google has done its part in moving a lot of the stuff out of the OS level and into the services level, so that it's they can basically update stuff like they would any other app. It's important, but there are a lot of moving parts in an Android smartphone, especially when you compare it to an iPhone.
I was going to say also with Windows Phone, they've been doing that. Nokia especially has parts of the system that can be just updated on the fly, and that does seem to be more important in the long run than like updating the whole OS. I mean, I have the HTC One now, and I'd updated to 4.3. And I was like, okay, and it comes back. I'm like, it looks the same. Now I'm an Android noob, kind of. I haven't really used Android, as an everyday thing. So, but I'm sort of that typical consumer who just buys a phone and wants to use it. And to me, I'm like, okay, so 4.3. And I always think that's something, our audiences, we have those core users who are so hooked on updates, and it's like the most important thing to them. But you go to anyone on the street who just has a smartphone and be like, hey, what version do you run? They're not going to have any idea. No. And they're definitely not going to know what's coming. And so it's such a, I don't know, it was fun to know.
Clearly that's the case, or else the market share of Android phones wouldn't be what it is today, right? Like Nexus phones would be the #1 seller, but what actual number of Nexus phones are out there in the world compared to the tens of millions of Samsung devices and everything else?
Yeah, I mean more than there used to be, but not that many. But the other thing we tend to forget is there's not just one version of Android 4.3, so if you have it on a Samsung phone, it's the same as if you get it on an HTC phone, right? That's just the base operating system that the manufacturers have done God knows what to. So when you talk about these things, it's there's the Samsung Android phone, and then there's the HTC Android phone, and then they get customized even to lower levels for the U.S. carriers. So there's not just like one update to rule them all. And that's what's been so hard. I mean, we've been preaching this forever, right? So whenever somebody puts up iPhone upgrade numbers against Android upgrade numbers, it's apples and oranges, and nobody calls them out on it. And it's annoying, but I'm tired of fighting that losing battle because it doesn't show you the numbers that you want it to, right? There's not just one 4.3 upgrade, right? There's this 4.3 base code that gets permutated into just so many different ways.
So there's one sort of controversial question I want to ask you, and it's something a lot of analysts have been talking about, something we've been talking about on Vector. I think Kevin spoke with me about it, last week on Vector. The idea that Android is now more than one platform in the mobile space. So, for example, it was Windows Phone and BlackBerry battling it out for the #3 spot, but a lot of people will point out that Droid is actually #3 on Verizon after Samsung and Apple. And, maybe Motorola is going to have a huge market share, and Android could become not one unified ecosystem, but more like the Amazons and maybe the Facebooks, and who else we heard? We heard about other phone manufacturers. Can you see a time where Android is different enough that it occupies multiple spots on the platform scale?
I think it already does. It's not the OS's fault that we can't figure it out, that we, for some reason, don't have that capacity to think of that. Yeah, I mean, it's been doing that from the start.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think we could start counting like Droid as its own operating system and give it its own metrics. That just seems stupid. I mean, it still runs the Google Play Store. You download the same apps. It runs the same. The core of it's still the same. It's just
every month, Google puts out the platform version numbers, right? Usually in the second or third of the month. And the way they measure it is by devices that access the Google Play Store in the 2 weeks prior. That, to me, makes more sense, right? Yeah. That way, and they break it down by version, but they actually break it down by SDK level, which I think is even more accurate. So, yeah, I mean, there are different ways to look at it, and oftentimes what we see is people kind of twisting those numbers into something that fits their argument a little better. Look, I mean, it's not to say Apple shouldn't be commended for the upgrade statistics anytime a new version is released. It's awesome. It's really, really good. But it should be, because that's the way the entire platform was developed. It was developed as this just vertical straight line in building and keeping everybody on track.
But we get no hardware variation as a consequence of that.
And Android is the exact opposite. We're repeating things we've been repeating for years now, right? Is one better than the other? In some respects, yes, absolutely. In other respects, it might not matter.
So I want to tangent to Daniel a bit because, I do understand that the platform's popular. For example, Amazon now probably isn't going to run Google Play, and a lot of people, they could look at a Kindle and the word Android will never come to mind. And if they ship that Amazon phone sometime, I don't know where you classify that device anymore.
Well, I think that is a fork, right? I mean, Phil can touch on this, but there are the forking of, we have one operating system that abides by Google's terms and they can use all the Google services, and then you have that other group that veers from that, doesn't agree to it, and those are really completely different devices. At the core, they're the same, but I mean, they're marketed wildly differently, but that's still, a completely different operating system. Well, not completely different, but I mean, they're just sold differently, so.
They're blurring all our lines, Derek.
Yeah, going back to Rene's question or thesis there, because I know he's a believer that Android is going to be referred to as multiple operating systems, because we discussed it.
Or not at all. Like Samsung will be something, and people won't even know it's Android anymore.
But I think the Google Play tie-in is the thing that will make people say, okay, it's Android, right? And if you don't touch Google Play and the app ecosystem and content ecosystem, then you could argue that it's something different at that point, where they've really made it their own. But it kind of goes back to like the feature phone ecosystem, right? You had all these companies, the Samsungs, the LGs, the Kyoceras, everybody duking it out in the feature phone world, making hundreds of millions of phones, even when smartphone industry as a whole was small. Now they all, got their second wind, tying themselves to Android. It's worked. These companies are around selling big volumes, but they're Android as long as they touch Google Play to me. And then if we start to see them separate again into their own little worlds, kind of like they did in the feature phone era, maybe they can take it back, and at some point they won't need to tie that Android logo to whatever it is they're selling. But as long as it touches Google Play, I think they have to.
What about Samsung, Phil? I mean, they are so big. They make almost all the profit in Android. They have most market share in Android. They have their own store. They're going to be having their own developer conference. How big is Samsung? Is it hard to get an idea of just how massive Samsung is for Android right now?
The current example I'm using is I was watching something called Build It Bigger on like one of the educational channels, History Channel or something. I forget what it was. And they were building, I think it was natural gas drilling facilities to work off the coast. I think it was off the coast of Russia, like right next to Siberia, and they were being built by Samsung.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in here and say I've had a crazy couple of weeks, but one of those weeks was spent in Asia, and I had the chance on Mobile Nation's business to actually drop by Samsung HQ for the day, and had some interesting discussions and saw firsthand just how big Samsung is. We're talking about a company that makes up like a third of South Korea's GDP. I mean, the hotel we stayed at, the Shilla, is owned by Samsung. I mean, the reservations are like Shilla reservations at Samsung.com. You're driving down the street. There's clothing stores. It's like
Samsung Street.
There's Samsung clothing stores. I mean, the whole city is that. But in terms of mobile, they're huge. I mean, I had a great sit down with WP Hong, and who's one of the senior guys on the mobile division, and spoke a lot about the upcoming developer conference. But he emphasized a couple things. One of which is localization is one of their big ways of differentiating and competing in mobile around the world, right? He really said, we don't believe it's a one-size-fits-all approach to mobile, which is clear when you look at just their hardware sizes, right, where they give lots of options, small screens to big screens to super huge screens. But even locally, he's very clear to say, we don't think what works in North America works around the rest of the world. So we spend a lot of time customizing devices for these devices we sell for every single region. And on the back of that, they have over 10,000 software developers now just focused on their phone OS. That's a lot of people. Like, this is a big company, and I had a chance to talk to some of the different teams in there, and it was cool to see. I visited other manufacturers before, and this was a lot of friendly people. No, it wasn't Waterloo, but it was kind of like you took a Waterloo and you stamped it on another part of the world. There were definitely similarities. and definitely a lot of passion from the people I spoke with to build a great product and really cared about consumers getting a great experience. And that's what I took away from it was, sometimes Samsung has had its share of things which you can harp over them for strategy-wise over the years, and they've gotten into their share of battles with other companies or been brought into them one way or another. But I think the thing I walked away with is any of those past transgressions, for lack of a better word, I really think they come back to wanting to build products for people and giving them what they want. It starts off with consumer choice.
So before we let Phil go, because I know he's on a tight deadline now, Phil, Galaxy Gear and looking forward to the next 3 months of Android, what are the big things for you?
Yeah, no, I'm excited about the smartwatch space. The Galaxy Gear isn't it yet. It's a decent first try from Samsung. It looks nice. A lot of the problems I have with it can be fixed by software. It's tip of the iceberg, though. Really is the tip of the iceberg. And as we see more big players getting into it, and not just Kickstarter campaigns, and I love the Pebble, but it's night and day compared to, I think, just style and design of what Samsung has done. Only the beginning of that space. Absolutely.
I was going to say, I love I saw the Samsung commercial last night on TV.
Really good commercial.
Yeah, I mean, that commercial, if you haven't seen it, I'm sure it's on YouTube. Look it up, though, because it shows the marketing power of Samsung. When I was watching, all it is clips from like cartoons and shows throughout for the last 40 years, showing like smartwatches, right? The concept of it. But what blew me away was just thinking the dollar signs go in my head of the licensing for each one of those clips. Like Pebble could never do that, but Samsung was probably, and that must have cost a fortune just to do that one.
Here's a question, Dan, because I keep getting tips today because someone put up an article comparing that ad to Apple's 2007 iPhone ad, and frame for frame, it's incredibly similar to the 2000.
Really?
They both have the Flintstones with a phone, Flintstones with a watch. This guy with a phone, this guy. Does that matter at the end of the day? Does anyone remember the 2007 ad, or is it just smart to use something that worked?
I'm sure you could take that Apple ad, and I'm sure it's based off of something else. I mean, that concept of juxtaposing a new item compared to history is, they've done that with cars too, right? There are car commercials showing like a Honda throughout the years evolving. So I don't think that's necessarily a new thing. I don't actually remember that commercial, but whatever. I mean, if that's even true, good for Samsung because they're clearly going to use that same example, and they kind of beat Apple to this market. But then again, I still think when Apple does it, it's going to be a little bit more grand, like what Phil was saying, is the tip of the iceberg. Samsung didn't nail it, but someone will nail this eventually.
So here's one question on that point, because in the chat room right now, even the Gear's getting ripped apart a little bit. And one of the things that I took away from, I actually saw the Korea launch event for the Gear, was they really made a point that this thing's going to get a lot of upgrades software-wise. That the hardware is good, but this is early to market. You're obviously an early adopter if you pick it up, but that the actual hardware specs in it are, I don't want to say future-proof, but it's not like a 3-month throw it away because there's a better one.
Right.
That it will get a lot of updates.
And a lot of people who are ripping it apart have never touched it. So until you've actually worn it and tried it, even this is one of those things that using it in the store just won't cut it. Yeah. I'm not going to buy one. I'm not recommending anyone buys one. I've said that on a number of occasions right now. But I don't think it's DOA. It's expensive, but it does have potential. They've got to do some more work on it.
Till you've walked a mile with its pedometer, you have no right to judge.
Basically. All right, kids, I got to go.
Phil, what's next? Okay, bye, Phil. Thanks, Phil.
See ya.
Thanks, Phil.
All right, so we're going to switch over. We're going to do Kevin now because I want to end with warm and happy feelings, and I'm not sure which way he's going to go with this. He's unpredictable lately. So, Kevin, since last we spoke, the last time we did a Mobile Nations podcast, just to set the stage, BlackBerry 10 was, if not hitting all right, it was about to hit. You had a flood of new devices coming out. There was the Z10, the Q10, the Q5, more on the horizon. It's safe to say that things have taken a decidedly WebOS turn for you.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. You can't really sugarcoat it because the company has come out and basically said, look, we are withdrawing our efforts from the consumer smartphone space as we've been in that game lately, which means it's a little bit of the white flag to, the marketing dollars that Samsung and Apple are spending on their products. They're not going to compete head to head for that mainstream, smartphone dollar that's getting spent by customers. They haven't come out and waved the white flag at Windows Phone and said, congratulations, you're the third ecosystem, at least for now. But me and Dan had that conversation last week, and I pretty much congratulated him. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like they're stopping. BlackBerry just had their developer conference. That the Z30 is launching. It's not getting the same sort of carrier support as you would expect from the new latest and greatest BlackBerry. I don't know. That still sort of surprises me that Rogers in Canada, who's been pretty much the biggest BlackBerry pusher, in the world the last decade, is not going to stock the Z30, but other Canadian carriers are. It's very interesting.
I feel betrayed as a Canadian.
Well, so do I, because I'm a Rogers customer, right? And they've been getting ripped apart on their Facebook page and Twitter and everything else by all the crazy Canadian CrackBerry fans out there and BlackBerry lovers.
Lumia 1020 just launched.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, so there you go. No, so it's a really interesting spot because the company's pivoting. I mean, hardware is still in play for now, although they've said they're going to downsize their planned portfolio at what they're doing. They're definitely repositioning the marketing efforts, I think, to get a more efficient spend, more efficient return out of every dollar they spend in marketing. And I think what they've seen is they built BB10. They launched what they felt was, a good suite of devices, and they were really banking, in my opinion, on just upgrading the core user base. Coming into the launch of BlackBerry 10, they had 75 million customers. I'm pretty sure they said, look, if we can get, 10 to 20 million of these people to upgrade over the next few quarters, we're in great shape, right? We buy ourselves a lot of time to then keep working on the ecosystem and everything else that we need to work on to hopefully start competing head-to-head again with everybody else out there in the greater consumer space. So I don't think
they could have done better to help ease the upgrades or to help promote the upgrades?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this, and I recommend everybody listen to our Vector podcast that Rene and I recorded, what was that, last week?
It's got over 120,000 downloads already.
Yeah, crazy feedback. And, I've gotten reactions from former, current BlackBerry employees who basically have said that, in 1 hour, that's the most spot-on sort of summation and summary of what's been going on in the world of BlackBerry that's out there. So it's worth listening to. But yeah, they did a couple things, right? They made a lot of changes to BlackBerry 10. It's a brand new platform, and they kept some things looking very BlackBerry-like and changed other things so they're very different. So if you actually look at a BlackBerry 10 phone like the Q10, it looks a lot like the Bold 9900 minus the lack of trackpad and back button. So you'd expect it to maybe be the same. You turn on the device and the icon layout and everything looks fairly similar. It has that sort of more conservative kind of BlackBerry business approach. But then if you're an old BlackBerry user and you start using it, the actual way you interact with the device is very different, right? There is no trackpad, there is no back button. You have lots of gestures. You have this way to get to the hub. You have it's sexy in the terms of, okay, it's all touch friendly and that, which was never what BlackBerry was known for, but it's a very different user experience that's maybe not as friendly to that hardcore BlackBerry user of the past who wanted to use it, in the car while driving, which they shouldn't, or under the boardroom table with one hand. I mean, it changed the usage experience. So they kind of did the opposite of what Apple did with iOS 7, right? iOS 7 looks similar, but is very visually different. It's been updated. They've added and introduced some gestures and that, but they've done it in such a way that I think if you were an existing iPhone user, you don't feel like there's any learning curve going to iOS 7. You might discover some things, even if you don't read a blog post or have any clue of what got updated. You'll start to discover things, but you won't feel put off by the changes. And I think BlackBerry made enough changes to that user experience to put off a lot of that existing user base. And at the same time, the message was out there fairly broadly that, look, the gap in the app ecosystem still exists. And I think between those two things, you're just not seeing the existing user base rush out to upgrade other than those kind of hardcore people who are really waiting. So I think, bottom line, just the device sales haven't been happening. And one thing we've seen, too, is that even when people have gone Q10, who've upgraded from, say, the 9900, a lot of them have, at least to me it feels like a lot, I don't have hard numbers, but I've seen way too many people say, you know what, I'll just stick with my 9900 and get a new one of those because that's good enough for the communication experience that I always valued my BlackBerry for, and I'll just have a second device for my app ecosystem and game time, whether it's an iPad or iPhone or Nexus or maybe even the Windows Surface Pro, whatever it is. So push come to shove, things have not lined up the way they should. And BlackBerry companies are engines, right? And they have a big burn rate each month. They suck back a lot of fuel. And if they're not putting fuel in the tank at a quick enough rate, they're going to run on empty pretty fast. So you saw BlackBerry for many quarters actually growing their cash position into the launch of BB10. Everything's really good. It's a lot of money in the bank as long as you keep replacing it each month. And now this last quarter, you saw that holy smokes, they're burning cash, and they're sitting on about $1 billion worth of unsold Z10s. So clearly they didn't get that right. They produced more than they've sold, and now they've had to write down that inventory, and puts them in a tough position. So, on the one hand, it's just like, I'm not even really upset about it, right? It's just that it's matter of fact, you got to deal with it.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
I hate that saying it is what it is, but it is what it is. You can't even, as an end user, like say Derek, when you went through the WebOS trials and tribulations, for the longest time there was still this kind of fighting glimmer of hope sort of thing, because you didn't quite know what they were going to do until they finally dropped the axe on it. Mm-hmm. And I think here BlackBerry sort of dropped, they dropped the bomb. They said kind of what they're doing, but at a time when it's still new products coming to market.
They took the axe out of the holster, but they haven't chopped yet.
Yeah, but it's kind of not even like that, though, right? Because I don't know what they're going to do, honestly. I've been doing a lot of interviews this last week because I think every sort of big tech publication is doing their BlackBerry stories.
Job interviews.
No job interviews. Very funny. No, giving a lot of interviews.
I have Kevin on a 99-year contract, just so you know.
There you go. No, so it's been interesting to see how other publications are following kind of the BlackBerry story. The Globe did, I don't know what the Globe did. They did a big story last Saturday, which is what I like to call revisionist history. They're trying to make the old CEOs look like they were better than they were. I'm fine saying that out loud because I've heard that from many former and current employees of BlackBerry who agree that's basically what the take of that was in a few different respects, which we'll dive into. Other companies are focusing on, what they did so right over the years.
Should they have gone Android, Kevin? If they, instead of launching BB10, if they decided to be the enterprise layer on Android, would that have been better?
Look, we spoke about that on the Vector podcast, and I think that's one of the things the Globe interview didn't touch on. But if you look at sort of what are the big things that went wrong, for BlackBerry the last few years,
Sorry, go on, Kev.
I was going to say one is obviously, they didn't react quick enough to the iPhone, which is the case for a lot of companies. But I think BlackBerry, did it absolutely the wrong way, right? First, they tried to respond with the BlackBerry Storm, which is taking a two-way pager operating system that was never built for touch input or big apps and media consumption, and they adapted it into the Storm, and they continued to release many devices trying to improve that touch experience. I mean, they got a lot more out of that platform than they probably ever should have, so it's a testament to their engineering there, but it would have been better if at that point they started, fresh with something that was new. That mistake aside, going Android could have been the next savior sort of thing for the company. And they definitely had discussions about going, all Android versus going, doing it on their own. And ultimately they bought QNX and decided to take the tougher route of trying to compete and build it up. And that's hard. It delayed their timelines. If you look at what they did with the Playbook, another arguable mistake, because what probably would have been better is if they just kept selling BlackBerry 7 phones sooner, because they went into a period of not launching any new products for like 9 months. And that's when the media sentiment really started to go negative on BlackBerry because there were new phones for the longest time. So then by the time BlackBerry 7 launched, it felt almost a year behind where everybody else was at. So it got picked apart a little bit harder. And then in the meantime, they had to fix the Playbook, which launched half-baked kind of, and they didn't want to admit that and scrap it early, so they fixed it, which did get some of the groundwork done for BB10. But I think if they would have just worked on BB10 behind the scenes, maybe launched it a year sooner with a huge splash, and because they'd have even more money in the bank, they could have gotten more developers on board early with money. The sentiment wouldn't have been as negative. There would have been a shot, I think, at better pulling off the we're going to survive on our own and stake it out and do it ourselves. But I think the way everything kind of fell out, it was just the hardest situation possible. And
I just want to ask you, Derek, is this deja vu for you? Are you losing yet another platform? Does this particular one, it's like a kick in the second shin?
Yeah, I've been watching this go down for the past 2 years, quietly humming, I know how this story goes, because I just kept watching. BlackBerry didn't make the same mistakes as Palm, but they made some very similar mistakes. And they they had the example of Palm looking in and go, maybe we shouldn't do that. And they did it.
It's not fair because, like, for example, Microsoft and Apple have huge, and even Samsung have huge secondary revenue sources. They could bankroll their operating systems for as long as they want, but Palm and BlackBerry, they only had their mobile money.
Which is why both companies should have made deals with the big guys. They really, I mean, there was no way.
Well, Palm did. They got bought by HP.
True, right. But that was sort of
too
late. That was, that was more of a desperate move than a strategic move.
Well, I think on the back of the BB10 rollout too, the BlackBerry management team has been very prudent and proactive. Once they sort of realized, okay, things are going to plan A here, we need to figure stuff out fast on the business front. And I think they've done a really good job on that. And thinking on that, I honestly believe one of the biggest surprises for the current management team was that they didn't get the carrier support they honestly believed they were going to get for launching devices. So, when I went to Waterloo last year after their AGM, the marketing plan they came up with at that point, again, around, having the global launch, both phones, maybe a 2-week, 3-week separation in launch time frames, lots of US support. They really believed that was what was going to happen. And I think at that point, even the launch windows they felt were very tight between the Z10 and Q10. So I think they really felt that was there. And I think in reality what happened was, carriers probably, when they're doing their roadshow pitching BB10 to everybody, you're face-to-face, you're showing it off, you're very proud of what you're building, and you get a lot of feedback. I think they really believed in that. But then, 6 months later when it came time to launch the products, I think everything was much more lukewarm, especially in North America and that. And I think when you look at what they built for phones, like even sitting on $1 billion of Z10 inventory, you're not going to build those phones if you don't think you have carrier support. And I really feel what happened was they felt they had more support when they're making those decisions than what ultimately transpired by the time they launched.
Well, didn't Verizon give all the Palm Pre money to Droid at the end of the day?
Verizon was actually supposed to be the original launch partner for the original Pre, but then they backed out and they had to go with Sprint. And then Verizon was supposed to be all gung-ho on the Pre Plus, and they just used that to leverage Motorola for good Droid launch. And so that same sort of thing did happen with Palm. They didn't have $1 billion in unsold inventory, but they had a lot that they were just sitting on that they thought they were going to sell. I think BlackBerry, I don't have that personal connection to BlackBerry that I did to Palm, but this is much worse than Palm. When Palm sold to HP, it was for $1.2 billion. Not a whole lot of money. BlackBerry lost $1 billion, but they still brought in $1.6 billion in revenue just this past quarter. So BlackBerry's failure is a lot bigger than what went down with Palm. Palm was never a big player in the way that BlackBerry was.
BlackBerry was on top of the market, Kevin.
Yeah, no, they were. What was their market cap? Was $200 billion for a while there?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So it was 2007 or something like that, where they're like, it was ridiculous how much that company was worth.
Why doesn't Canada buy it, Kevin, and make it a crown corporation and give free phones to all of Parliament?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what's happening if they go private, right? Because Prem Watsa, who's a Canadian who runs Fairfax Financial, he's trying to, he basically put in the lowball bid to buy the company at, I think, what was it, $9 a share. But he doesn't have that money sitting right there, right? He's going to lead the people who buy it, which will end up being probably a lot of Canadian mutual funds and pension plans. So Rene,
Ontario Teachers Union.
Yeah, Rene will actually end up owning BlackBerry without having any say in it and realizing it is what could happen. But I'm going to go back a second to your point about should they have gone Android. And I would say right now, looking at everything, right? So mistakes made, opportunities missed or capitalized on, and everything else, and the current state of the game, that probably that would have been the best. That they would be the furthest along at this point had they done that, because it would have forced them to do a couple things, which is, on their business enterprise side, they would have figured out much sooner how to adopt and support multiple devices, because they would have known that Android in the marketplace maybe wouldn't be favored from day one, so they'd have to support iOS also in enterprise. So on the business side, they would have gone probably cloud-based, multi-platform very early on, which would have squashed out guys like Good and Mobile Iron that I'm talking enterprise first, that are owning that MDM, mobile device management system in the cloud, right? Just today, BlackBerry announced that they're piloting their cloud-based BES system that supports multi, right? But until now, it's still fairly not archaic, but it's a very physical system. You got to buy physical servers and all this. It's not as neat and tidy.
It's big iron.
Yeah, it's big iron type thing. So I think their enterprise business, they would have been forced to do what they had literally announced they're doing today years ago had they made that decision to support Android. So even their core non-consumer market, but their core business market, they would be probably years ahead and killed out some of those competitors, which is sort of the bread and butter, security enterprise story that BlackBerry was known for and began with. And then on the consumer front, I think they could have taken all the services like BBM, etc., and gone cross-platform with them and really rode that growth earlier, customized the heck out of the OS. So the things that BlackBerry is known for, like even the hub and that, you look at Android today and you look at what some of the manufacturers are doing with skins, and you could probably get a pretty good BlackBerry-like experience built on Android if they just forked it and made it their own. And I think they'd probably be tens of millions of devices ahead in the marketplace now. They would have had the potential to be sort of a number one or number two. And if anything, at that point, once you're on that same platform, if stuff didn't go well, you probably would have seen a bigger partnership get announced already, right? Like a Samsung would have come along and said, okay, what do we do here? Since we're all, your engineers, our engineers, we're all building on Android. We need more Android people. We need to, kick Apple's butt. Let's work together. But instead, by BlackBerry owning everything, losing the mind share, losing the sentiment, not getting the massive device sales on the new platform, you haven't seen anybody come pick them up yet, and probably even if it happens, it won't be to build out that ecosystem further, because whoever buys them and would want to do that would have the same challenges BlackBerry's had, right? So
before we switch to Dan, just quickly, Kev, where do you see BlackBerry in the next 3 months, going into end of 2013, beginning of 2014?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like 6 months out, I don't know what the company looks like. 3 months is maybe a little more safe to say we're probably where we are today. We'll find out if this privatization deal goes through or somebody else comes along. If that happens, I think you don't really know. If it goes private, it very quickly becomes, that's my money I'm losing if I'm not making money, right? Like for whoever buys it. And therefore, decisions become very, very swift, and you don't need to really worry about the public's reaction because you're just getting your shit in order. So if that means hardware's done, I mean, it could go private, and then it could be a week later, and they just say, you know what, severing the arm of hardware because on the bottom line, it makes more sense. I think as a public story, it's a little easier to keep fighting and keep spending the money in that, because you could say, look, if we do this right, it's the best ROI for shareholders, but it's a little different than if it's like out of the pocket. So I don't know what happens. If they go private, I think a lot of things can happen, many of which could be bad from, thinking about it from a consumer smartphone handset side of things. If that deal doesn't happen and somebody public buys them or partners with them, you just don't know what'll happen. I think the one thing we can bank on right now is, we will still see some hardware come out. At least for a little bit. The Z30 will roll out. We'll get them, we'll play with them, we'll have fun, we'll review it as we do every Hero device, and bandwagon it up the way we love to. But then at the same time, I think we know BBM will go cross-platform, right? So that launch even got off to a not so smooth start. But there's a good hope for it, right? We did some research, and you look at the cross multi-platform instant messaging game. And WhatsApp is kind of your leader right now in that pure instant messaging. But you look at all the other competitors, and they're quite a bit smaller. You look at where BlackBerry's at, given that it's only been on the one platform, given that there was a lot of demand on the opening day to get it downloaded. I think actually they can maybe do well with that. But they obviously need to get it launched. It's got to work well. They got a lot of things have to line up.
They got to ship.
They got to ship, and they got to get the right buzz, which it's harder to make that buzz, I think, now given the company's overall aura about it. But at the same time, I think that's something they're obviously focusing on very hard. And you look at the way they built it up, and you even look at the teams of people that I know that are sort of working on the BBM project, and it's a lot of sort of those. I don't want to call them best people, but people we've known over the years who are sort of go-getters and love BlackBerry and that, and right now they're loving the BBM project. So it'll be interesting. So I think hopefully we'll see in 3 months that's launched, it's rolled out, maybe they hit 100 million more users, and there's a happy story there.
Awesome. So Dan, I want to transition. Sorry, not Dan. Daniel, I want to transition to you because the BlackBerry story and the Windows Phone story, I mean, they were neck and neck for third place for a while, but
different trajectories.
A different trajectory, but there was this magical moment for me when Steve Jobs was still alive and he was on stage with Bill Gates at All Things D, and Walter Mossberg looked at him and he said, "You guys have very different strategies." And Steve Jobs went to his famous Allen case saying that people who want great software have to make their own hardware, and Bill Gates laughed at him and goes, "Well, we kind of disagree about that." But lo and behold, you've now got the Xbox, you've got the Surface, and you've went and bought Lumia from Motorola, so Microsoft is going to be making their own enchilada.
Nokia, yeah. I mean, listen, there's pros and cons to both strategies, right? So it's not, Apple's model has its pros, which is, of course, a more unified experience. The hardware they control the hardware and it matches the operating system. OS 10 and even iOS, I'm not a huge fan of it, at least cosmetically, but there's no doubt it works so well with the hardware, and I love Apple's hardware. I think they build some really good quality stuff. The downside to that, of course, is market share. So now they lucked out with the iPhone, but when it comes to their computers, it's still like, 10%. With the PC model, there are two things that happened. Costs were driven down, and so regular families and even like lower to middle class people can now have a PC. That wouldn't have happened if it was just the Apple model. And so you got to give credit to Microsoft for that. And two, we have variety of stuff which has really driven innovation. So I'm actually happy that both systems exist in the world. Now with Microsoft, and when it comes to the smartphone market, obviously things are a little bit different. Android is proving, I think, OEMs can create many different devices out there and still be relatively successful. Well, Samsung right now seems to be dominating that. Windows Phone, we tried that, and the problem is HTC and Samsung had other suitors, right? They had Android devices that were bringing more attention and money to their coffers, so they put Windows Phone on the back burner. Samsung has told us privately that, hey, when Windows Phone takes off, we'll be there, we'll make devices. Until then, it's not. So.
You know what? Honestly, not even privately. Like during that sit-down interview I had in Korea last week or 2 weeks ago, we asked about that, and similar answer, right? Like Samsung is such a company that they will follow the demands of the consumer market,
right,
and they don't dislike anything, right? So to think they don't like Windows Phone or they don't like this or they don't like that, I think I don't know.
They like money.
Yeah, Rene, there's probably a word here. It's not like they're a true democracy, but they're a true something.
They're pragmatic.
They're pragmatic. And if they see the winds turn or the shift turn, they'll support it. Now, what's interesting is Samsung's so big, arguably they could help make that turn happen.
Sure,
right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And I think that's maybe what we're not seeing for them.
And that's where sort of the bitterness lies. Is we always see this great hardware coming on Android for Samsung, and we're like, why not do that for Windows Phone? Because honestly, the TVS is one of my favorite Windows phones. It's light, it's thin, it's got a powerful processor, it's got all these features on it, but we never even saw it launch here in the U.S. I don't know whose fault that was, but
right.
Samsung does build great stuff, and so people say, like, if they were on board with Windows Phone. And they were. I mean, honestly, in the U.S., they had 90% in the Windows Phone market. Now it's like 90% Lumia, Nokia. And that switched within 18 months. It's crazy. Samsung just kind of gave up. And so now they're getting so far behind because Nokia's developed the platform so much that for Microsoft to buy Nokia, it's the equivalent, I said, of dating someone for 10 years and be like, hey, let's just get married and make it legal at this point. Because
hey, that sounds like a familiar story.
yeah.
Well, but the difference is Erica didn't evaluate you first, Kevin.
Yeah,
I guess not. Yeah.
So I think it makes total sense. There are hurdles, there are questions. Microsoft still has some skepticism when it comes to building hardware. They have a mixed track record, but I think things like the Surface, despite what people said, the RT and the Pro succeeding, it's I think inarguable that their hardware is fantastic. I brought the Pro down to Miami and showed a couple of guys, and everybody was like, "Wow, this is really nice."
Yeah, fine. They may have a mixed track record on it, but they just bought a hardware company.
Yeah. And so, and what's good, they're going to keep that hardware company in Finland. They're not bringing it over to Seattle. It's going to operate sort of as it looks like, at least a separate division, and do their own thing, which is the smart thing to do. So I think there's a lot of potential here. Microsoft's got so much going on, whereas BlackBerry has been sort of on this downward trajectory. Microsoft is going through so many changes. You got Steve Ballmer stepping out. You have them buying Nokia. You have Stephen Elop now coming back into the company, and talks of him becoming CEO. You have Windows 8.1 about to launch, and I've been using 8.1 for months now, and it is a huge improvement to 8. And I really liked 8, but when I use 8.1 now, I can't go back to 8. I find it difficult.
You have Xbox One coming as well?
Xbox One coming. We have Windows Phone 8.1 going to be coming in a couple months, but they're already coming out with GDR3 updates for that. We have this month the phablet 6-inch Lumia coming out, 1520. We have another device for Verizon coming out at the same time. We have Nokia's first Lumia tablet coming out now. That will also be at the end of the month. I mean, there is just, then you have Surface 2, both RT and Pro coming out.
Breathe, Daniel, breathe.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like so much happening.
You're going to need a bigger website.
Yeah, and Skype is getting revamped. I mean, they're finally making a lot of progress in that regard. You know, Microsoft's a pretty exciting company right now, and I think, you know, a lot of the arguments you've seen against the modern UI and everything is just going to slowly disappear as once people start using it. Because every time someone uses 8.1 extensively, they're like, wow, this is actually kind of nice, you know, and they just have there's just a lot happening for us right now. So as BlackBerry
does, is it ironic that people complain about the UI on Windows 8 where you have tons of apps and the apps on Windows Phone where you have great UI?
Yeah. I mean, you know, there are legitimate complaints here, and what's nice is Microsoft has actually been a lot more, almost too much responsive to the community. Every time they make a decision and people are like, no, boo, they're like, all right, fine, we'll change it. And it's the only problem with that, it seems like they're making a lot of bad decisions that they reverse then. So it's a mixed bag. I'd rather them make the right decisions from the beginning.
What do you think about the argument? I mean, some analysts suggest that there's only so much space in the market and that Samsung has taken over the massive hardware vendor that Nokia used to be, and Google, by being free, has taken over the low-priced operating system layer that Microsoft used to be, and that's why a combined strategy is smarter for Microsoft and Nokia.
You know, I've never bought this argument. I understood that there's not room for 4 players for operating systems in mobile. 3, though, just seems like it makes sense. We do a lot of things in threes in this world. So,
Dan, we also do a lot of things in pairs in this world.
Yeah.
So, I don't know which one.
Is a combined Microsoft Nokia stronger in the market than the two companies separately?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. You know, they talked about the strategy, how Nokia, even while they were working with Microsoft, kept stuff from Microsoft. They didn't just go, hey, here's our product roadmap and here's everything we're working on, because Microsoft would also have meetings with HTC and Samsung, and who knew what would leak. So they did keep things private. Even the Lumia 1020, which it did work closely with Microsoft, Ballmer even said, you know, if we were one company, there were things we could have done more at the OS level for the 1020 and the camera, you know, which I think a lot of it is addressing complaints about the slowness and, you know, default camera apps and stuff. And so the idea is that when these two companies work together, they can get rid of this sort of, I work for this company, you work for this company, we have different systems, and we have to maintain this, we can't show all our cards. And so now the two teams can really work together, no holds barred. And that's kind of interesting. I'm not saying it's a guaranteed recipe for success, because once again, Microsoft has had some organizational issues to deal with, but I think it has potential to be a very powerful system. They could become this vertical system, sort of like Apple, sort of like what BlackBerry was too, and what, you know, Google's sort of trying to redo now with the Android. We're trying to get Motorola back in line, so Samsung doesn't take over the platform completely.
It was funny, Kev, when we started this podcast, Steve Jobs ran Apple, Eric Schmidt ran Google, Mike and Jim ran BlackBerry, and Steve Ballmer ran Microsoft. And now as we go into 2014, not one of those people is still in charge of that company.
Kind of crazy to think about, but that's the truth. I mean, as much as you feel like, you know, things are stabilized, like, okay, smartphones grew through a big transition, this is going to play, the game is played out, it's like, nope, no, we're only just beginning.
Where do you see the next 3 months, 6 months of Windows Phone, Daniel? Is there going to be a new CEO that quickly? Are there going to be new directions? Or do you think it's all about going all in on the current strategy?
There's so much going on right now, you know, between, you know, and there's a lot of questions, like the Xbox One. How's that launch going to go? But I'm just on paper, the One looks fantastic. It should be very successful. But, of course, things can go wrong. I mean, it could launch. There could be hardware problems. You know, I believe it will do well, though. Surface 2 seems like it's doing well in the sense that they've addressed a lot of the early complaints about it. Even RT, people are still like, no, RT, get rid of it. I bought the Surface 2 RT. I'm a big fan of it. It depends on what your needs are. When I want to do actual hardcore computing, I'll use my Ultrabook or my full desktop. But I actually sort of want the RT experience. The price needs to come down a bit, but I think that will happen in the future.
The ads are better.
The ads are certainly better. Their marketing team, I think, is getting on board. Windows Phone is going to continue to grow. In the U.S., it's still struggling. It's increasing growth, but not as fast as people want. But if you look at countries like Mexico, India, China, Russia especially, you're seeing a lot of growth into the double digits finally. Even in the UK, we're hitting double-digit growth now. So it's finally taking off, and I think that story will continue to grow. And it's just a self-reinforcing thing. Once you project yourself as a third player and you project success, the market will follow. It's always
success begets success.
So Dan, one question on that. With that part of their business, right, which I'm assuming is more the low cost handsets picking up a lot of market growth.
Yeah.
Are they profitable on that part of their business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they are. I think Nokia. They're not just completely biting the bullet on low-cost devices. It's a strategy they've been aware of and working on for years. And they've been developing a lot of core technologies to use that. So I think it's planned out. Now, those profit margins are probably a lot more slim compared to, say, the high-end iPhones or the Lumia 1020. But I think with the mixed thing, at least now Nokia, with the hardware division going to be a part of Microsoft, that's sort of a less of a concern, right? Microsoft could still take a loss on hardware or not make as much money, but that's okay so long as they're gaining market share. That would have been a problem for Nokia earlier as an independent company because they could only do that for so long before the returns are going to start to reflect on their stock price. So there's just... I think the message is going to change. I think the big problem for the last even 2 years was BlackBerry, to be honest. There was this question of who's going to be third, and both had potential. And I think developers and a lot of companies and others were sitting on the sidelines going, let's see how this plays out so we don't invest into one with it losing. Now that I think it's clear that BlackBerry's on the way out and Windows Phone is coming in, I think you're going to see a lot more investment and commitment from developers and companies and enterprise with that platform. We just saw Delta. They're going to be adopting a Surface 2 for their pilots. They're going to be adopting the Lumia 820 for their flight attendants. These are all huge enterprise deals, and I think we'll continue to see more of those.
All right, so we're going to transition to Apple, and I'm going to force Derek to wrap us up with a mobile sanity check. But Kevin, Apple is doomed. I mean, they can't do anything right. They're beleaguered. They're always one step away from financial ruin. Tim Cook should be fired. None of this would happen if Steve Jobs were still alive. And they sold 9 million handsets on iPhone launch day. How do we reconcile these very disparate realities of the media perception and the market perception of Apple with the actual, sales and profitability of Apple?
Well, I think just don't pay attention to the media because I typically ignore the media, and I haven't had that perception at all.
I ignore the media, and I am the media.
We're the better part of the media, though. We're community driven. We're
real people.
We're passion driven. There's a big difference to that.
Because if Steve Jobs were still alive, they would have sold 10 million.
Maybe. No, I mean, look, I just came back from 2 weeks on the road, right? I saw a lot of iPhones.
You went to the launch event.
Even I have an iPhone.
Yeah, Daniel has an iPhone.
My first one's crazy.
I think the only thing with Apple I'd say is they are leaving. It's almost like they could have an even bigger noose around the market if they wanted to in the competition. I mean, they could go if they went after the low end and if they went after the bigger screen end of the market.
Right. Totally.
They would be hurting Dan's story of double-digit growth there in markets, and they'd be hurting the Samsung story also. So really, the only thing I can criticize right now is I think they're leaving money on the table that is there. However, I think they probably know that, and they know they can pick it up probably whenever they want to. And whatever they do, Rene, I've listened to your podcasts. The problem Apple has is scale, right? When they make a decision, they need to be able to do it at mass scale.
100 million devices have to ship that year.
Yeah, so once they know they can get big screens cheap enough and reliably enough, that's probably when they do it. And if they're not there yet, they're okay. And you look at the numbers they're getting in the meantime, they're obviously doing enough to get people excited. And, I did that video at the launch day event in Miami there. And
Kevin's quest for a gold iPhone.
My quest for a gold. Well, that's what the video turned out being. It was really just that wasn't quite the video when we started, but it turned out to be pretty entertaining. But I was surprised at the turnout. Like I've been to a couple of those events before over the years where I just happened to be in Miami when a new iPad or iPhone is launching, and I was expecting it to not be as busy this time, and it was the busiest one yet, right? And
a lot of the media was and a lot of the media were like, oh, the 5C, who cares? The 5S, you mean the 5 same? There was a lot of negative press going against this thing. So it does speak to the strength of Apple that they can still bring out those numbers.
Yeah, I think the only thing that works against Apple now is that we live in this world where customers and consumers just aren't as impressed anymore, right? Like we have these almost impossibly high expectations. Apple's still doing some cool stuff. Like I love Touch ID. I think that's one of those things that
I want it on everything.
I want it on everything. I mean, because I hate typing in passwords, and I'll admit, for too long, I just didn't use a password because I said, well, you know what, my phone's always with me, and nobody's gonna get it. Like I'll never forget it
until it's not.
Yeah. Although exactly, then it's like, hey, you get out of a taxi cab, and you're like, oh shit,
phone check.
I always do my pocket tapping, and I'm like, uh-oh, there's a phone in the cab, and you saved it that time, but.
So what scares me about Apple, though, is that Steve Jobs said this. He goes, they accuse Apple of always trying to hit a home run, but that's the Babe Ruth play. You go up there and you hit for that home run, and it's okay as long as you keep hitting it. But they keep doing these multi-year gambles. For example, Touch ID depends entirely on the A7 processor, which they've spent the last 7 years trying to build. If that hadn't panned out this year at the right time with that device, what would be the marquee feature for it? Because big screens aren't coming until next year. If Siri hadn't landed on time, what would they have done with the iPhone 4S? They keep managing to pull it together at the last minute now, but I don't know, when you have competitors like Microsoft's money banks and Samsung's massive reach, how long you can keep hoping that home run gets hit every year on the year.
Well, thankfully, Apple still has massive money bags and lots of talent on their side, too. People are always moving back and forth between companies in Silicon Valley, but Apple, despite the changes that they've gone through, is still a premier destination for a lot of employees. They wouldn't mind working at Apple. It's a big, stable company that's not going anywhere anytime soon. I think, if Apple doesn't announce their products until they're ready to announce them. So if Siri had needed an extra 2 weeks, they wouldn't have announced it for another 2 weeks. If the iPhone 5S wasn't ready yet, they would have waited to announce it. Apple doesn't play by the same cycle rules that everybody
Apple
else
Maps.
played by.
They waited till Maps was ready.
they waited until they thought Maps was ready.
Mobile Me. But there are exceptions. But for the most part, it's true. They do.
And Apple's had, like Dan just pointed out, Apple's had their stumbles, and they recover from them. People always say, well, oh my God, Apple apologized. Apple apologizes all the time because they screw up a lot of stuff. But the point is that they realize they screwed it up, and then they put all their effort into fixing it. Sometimes you have to try something new and it doesn't work. But I think so far Apple has the giant bags of money and the really deep talent bench that they can keep pulling this stuff off, even if it's at the very last minute before a product's ready.
Yeah. Well, the other thing they're doing, sorry, Rene, I wanted to jump in, is, we talk about Apple and what they're going to do with each phone to make it impressive. But I think the beautiful thing they've done now is, because they have hundreds of millions of devices in the market, and they've become a launch pad for a lot of successful companies, they can take back that success from third parties pretty much whenever they want, because they know they can build a better experience. So you look at the wearables market, for example, where Nike builds the Fuel Band, and Fitbit does the Flex. At whatever point they decide, it's time for us to take back that money, they can come out with one that's arguably better, because they can just integrate that thing better than anybody else. Learn from what everybody else has done, learn from how the price points are doing with consumers, and they can do it. And I wouldn't doubt that they have the ability to zag whenever they need to. So if they feel they don't have enough with the next iPhone to push, you'll just see a little bit of it's magic, right? A little bit of distraction here with a new product. It'll give them that extra time to get that new feature out on the next iPhone when they need to, and they can just push a little longer. And they seem to be able to pull that off.
I mean, it's interesting. Daniel kept talking about how much he loved the lower-end Windows phones, and I've never understood. I'm like, no, Dan, you have a 1020. Why the hell do you even pick up a 520? But with the iPhone 5C, I know it's just an iPhone 5. Intellectually, I know that, but I see that Hulk green exterior, and it comes right. I mean, the background of the operating system combines with that, so it looks like it's one thing, and it's so much fun. And I understand what Dan's been
finally
talking about.
getting it now, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. I do think, Kevin, I think you absolutely made a good point there. Apple, as far as I know, the iPhone 6 is going to have a bigger screen, so that right now you have to choose between iOS and a big screen. Which one do you want more? Next year you'll be able to pick iOS with a bigger screen. I don't think they're going to go cheap, though. I think they never made a netbook. They always say they don't know how to make an inexpensive device, that they would be proud to make. And I think that's just their choice on margins. They want to still have that 20 to 30% margin no matter what they do, and they're not going to break that rule until the company physically hurts from not breaking it. So I don't think we'll see a cheaper iPhone, but I think we will see the iPhone 5C we have now go down $100, and they're getting into the resale market, and apparently they're taking all these trade-in iPhones, refurbishing them and selling them in South America and other countries where it's Dan's 1 billion next customers. I don't know how that'll work from them, but it is an interesting play. But I think the next 3 months with Apple, we have Mavericks coming next month, this month actually, next generation Apple operating system. We have new Macs coming, the Haswell Mac Mini, Haswell MacBook Pros. We have their all-new, Kiss Phil Schiller's ass Mac Pro that shows Apple can still innovate. And we have iPads coming. We have a thinner iPad 5 and hopefully a Retina iPad Mini. So I think it was not hurtful. It's not the right word. It was hard being someone who covers Apple products, not having them announce products for a year. That was painful to me. I was so damn bored.
It's rough, isn't it?
It scares the crap out of me how much they're announcing in the fall now. For the last 2 years in a row, it's been almost everything in the fall. And I need more nanites in my blood, Kevin.
You do. Get on it, Rene.
All right, so Derek Kessler, you are our Mobile Nation's managing editor. You're supposed to keep all the big pictures inside. What do you think of the mobile market this year, and where do you think it's going?
The mobile market this year has been kind of interesting. We've got Windows Phone is starting to pick up a little bit of steam. I'm not going to say it's taking off just yet, but it's picking up steam. I see people. I've actually seen real people out there using a Windows Phone or using a Surface tablet, and I had to do a double take because people bought that.
It was Hawaii 5.0, wasn't it?
No, real people. Like I could touch them, and they're not a television. And BlackBerry is gone by the wayside, but the question is how BlackBerry was for the past several years or past few years sort of conceptually and intellectually important, but I'm not sure that they were market important. And Samsung has very much definitely solidified that being in charge of the Android ecosystem. And I don't know where HTC is going to go from here. HTC is almost in the same position of BlackBerry. They brought in $1.6 billion of revenue, which is not enough for BlackBerry. Is that enough for HTC? No, they lost money too. And that makes me sad because, BlackBerry made great hardware. I have the Q10 sitting over here. I love the keyboard on the Q10. It's a great keyboard. I have an HTC One and a couple of other Android devices. The HTC One is my favorite hardware. Well, I have the Google Play edition, so I can't comment on the Blink Feed software, but I love the hardware on that thing. And it turns out building just great hardware isn't enough. You have to have the great software and the marketing behind it. And that, I think it's really what got Samsung where they were, is everybody had billions of dollars to dump into building great hardware. HTC had a lot of money to dump into building great hardware and great software, but Samsung was so aggressive with their marketing.
Also, Samsung also has a unified message of the Galaxy. Everything's Galaxy now, and it's like...
And HTC's message has just been this muddled mess.
Yeah, now they're trying to correct it with the One, but it seems like it's a little too late now for that, unfortunately. Nokia, and now what's going to be Microsoft, has the Lumia, which is becoming its main message and consistent experience. I think that was the problem with HTC, and it's kind of a shame.
Yeah.
I think they're sorry. Go ahead, Derek.
No, I'm just rambling.
Yeah, no, you made me listening to you talk about HTC and that. It reminded me of an old adage and piece of investing advice I heard many years ago, and I've subscribed to it, and it typically never steers you wrong. Which is, when it comes to tech companies, just ask yourself the question every single day: if this company disappears, does anybody care? Right? And it's really interesting to do that over time, and you look at how things change, because you could have a company that, say like Palm and WebOS there, right? It's like, okay, good product, new OS, it's exciting, but the fact was, if you look at all the things out there, if the company went away, does anybody care?
Yeah, if Palm disappeared, we would be sad about it, but everybody out there, Palm was still around.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because even BlackBerry, right? If you asked that question 4 years ago or 5 years ago, it's like, okay, BlackBerry and I mean, it happened, right? Their network goes down for 4 hours,
Yeah,
and
people panic.
It's panic, global out. People in Toronto don't know what to do.
The analysts use it, so everyone is doomed.
Yeah, everybody's doomed, right? But over time, when you ask that question, it's gotten a little bit less yes and yes, because there's competitors who can take the place. Maybe there'd be some very short term, oh my God, BlackBerry disappeared tomorrow. But the strength of that scream got a little bit quieter as the games have changed. And I think HTC is a very interesting one, because when it comes to HTC and phones, if HTC disappears, does anybody care? And it's just not that strong an answer. Now you look at Apple these days, coming back to your thing, Rene, about everybody's crying it's the end of the world. I mean, you have a device now and a family of devices that have just permeated their way through industry, through schools, like they're through everywhere.
Culture. And just culture,
culture, right? It's safe. And then, Samsung, kind of an interesting question when it comes to phones. I mean, yes, there are a lot of companies that could come in and probably pick up the slack there, and would love for that to happen, right? You'd see Motorola, you'd see everybody come in.
LG, finally our time.
Yeah, LG is their time.
Huawei's moment.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting question to ask, and I think that's the one. And you look at historical examples, companies like Dell and what they went through, where they're on top of the world, but then after a while, it's like, well, if Dell disappears or changes, does anybody care? And I think that's the question that we keep asking.
IBM used to be the most important computer company in the world, and now they're only relevant for people behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, I'll shut up.
No, that was interesting. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. Look at, again, we talked about the difference between just starting this podcast and now, beginning of Mobile Nations. You mentioned this, Kevin. We started as Visor Central, and now if you tell people that, they're like, what's a Visor?
Yeah, it's always fun, right? Hey, what's your history? Never start with that, because it's like, what? I don't know what you're talking about.
Too far back. Right?
It's now too far back.
Forge War, right?
Yeah, you can start with Palm. It's like, we started back in the early days of mobile with the Palm. People remember Palm Pilot still, but even that, I think in 2 more years, we probably have to start with BlackBerry.
We used to joke and say, when we had Android Central, and every show was going to be the show there would finally be Android devices, and it was a when is Android going to start? And now I think Phil doesn't even want to wake up in the morning.
Exactly.
All right. So last final words, Dan, cross-platform sort of. What are you most excited about going into the new year, going into CES?
Oh, it's going to be I'm excited to see what happens with BlackBerry. I think it's a fascinating story. Not that I want them to, just die, but I'm actually fascinated about what's going to happen with that company in terms of, this Fairfax deal is not done yet. There's rumors that Google may step in, or Samsung, or who knows what partner might come in and scoop up some stuff. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that story. Apple is going to continue doing what they're doing. The 5S is clearly, not the flop that a lot of people were predicting. Android is, always chaotic to follow. To follow Android now, it's basically what is HTC doing, what's Samsung doing, and that's sort of the main device.
What's LG doing?
Motorola.
Yeah, to a lesser extent, what LG is doing. Although that G2 is getting awful reviews apparently. But they're still driving that story. And then you have Microsoft. I think it's going to be Microsoft has a lot on their plate. It looks really good, but can they execute that? How well does that execute? It's going to really determine your success in the future. And so I'm real curious where we are in December, January, to see how well that stuff is being adopted by consumers and received by them.
And what's next for you, Nokia World?
Yeah, so Abu Dhabi in about 2.5 weeks, I think 2 weeks, we'll be there for Nokia World, where we're expecting that phablet, at least.
So, Dad, that just sounds like the kids blowing all the money before the parents come back home.
I think that's what it is, too. I think this is going to probably be the last Nokia World, and so they're going to Abu Dhabi, and they're going big. It's going to be.
I'm going out big.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about it. Although I'm looking forward to the 13.5-hour one-way direct connection flight to go there. But I'm sure once I'm there, it'll be a lot of fun. So we'll be there covering it live, and it should be an exciting time at least.
Nice, Derek. What are you looking forward to in the next month or 3?
I'm looking forward to the the next steps in the BlackBerry story, and also seeing where things go with HTC. What I know Apple's going to do fine. They're going to figure out whatever has gone wrong apparently with iOS 7. I'm fine and happy with iOS 7. I have nothing wrong with any of my devices running it. What really interests me the most is going to be the Google Motorola story. Because it was they bought Motorola, and Motorola went dark for a year. And then they spat out the new Droids and the new Moto X. And I'm not sure that's seeing any traction right now. Google has the ability to go, oh, yep, we wasted $16 billion on that. But I don't think they are going to just... They're not just going to go, my bad, sorry. They are going to do something about Motorola. If it means that they're going to pump even more money into the advertising that they're doing, because I think... It's kind of interesting. Motorola's ads with the fat, sweaty guy with the beard make me chuckle. But they're sort of like Samsung's ads a couple of years ago. I'm like, what are you trying to sell me? Show me the product and tell me why it's great.
They did get you to grow a beard in their defense.
It's gone now, though. All gone. I think the Google Motorola story is going to be the real interesting one, especially what Phil was saying. They're decoupling so much of what we consider to be Android from Android. Android is becoming just the core, the kernel.
Embedded Linux.
Yeah, with everything tacked on top of it that makes it the Android that we think we know. I think that's really going to be what's the most interesting thing coming up in the next 6 years. 6 years. I don't know what's happening next year. 6 months to a year.
Kevin Mitchell, next month, next 3 months, how do you see the market?
Obviously, the BlackBerry story will be interesting to watch and, for me to be part of. Like Dan and Derek, I think there's a lot of people out there interested because, honestly, turmoil around a company is amazing for traffic. Other than our BlackBerry 10 spike at launch time, our traffic to CrackBerry is kind of at as high as it's been in the last couple of years. So,
speaking from experience, I can tell you that spike is great.
Well, no, now it's
while it lasts.
It's more than a spike now. It's continued, but yeah, eventually, I don't know we know what happens, but it's pretty interesting to watch. So the site is very busy, and I think we'll see a lot of interesting discussions continue. And we've been on a pretty good track record with doing way more CrackBerry podcasts lately. So we're going to keep hammering those out because they're so easy to fire up now. We're going to get them out, catch up on 3 years in neglect or 4 years in neglect as we see where the story goes.
Is there any truth to the rumor that any company who wants to could pick, because you're at CrackBerry Kevin, but is it true for $2-3 million you could be I don't know, Mophie Kevin or Motorola Kevin or?
Well, let's just say that just because the position's filled right now doesn't mean I'm not accepting resumes and offers from others.
Victoria's Secret Kevin on Twitter.
No, don't start any nasty rumors there. Although my email is kevin@crackberry.com. And as long as there's a whole lot of zeros, we'll see. There's a conversation to be had. No.
All right, Phil Nicholson. Next month, next 3 months, what's the mobile marketplace look like?
More phones, more tablets, more wearables. I think wearables are going to be all over the damn place, and there's nothing we can do about it.
And for my part, I'm looking forward to a bunch of new tablets. I think that as everyone has said, BlackBerry is going to be very interesting. I don't buy this premise that you have to be integrated. It works for Apple. It did not work for BlackBerry. It did not work for Palm. Samsung is hugely successful not being an integrated hardware vendor. I think Microsoft, they tried it one way. They're going to be trying it another way, and we'll see which one ends up working better for them. But I like the fact I'm more in the fact that we don't have more platforms. I liked having WebOS. I like having BlackBerry. I like having choice and excitement. I like feeling that mobile is still new and still changing. But I think maybe we're growing up and we're becoming mature and we don't get to have all the toys we used to have in our childhood. And while I don't like that, I will kind of get used to it.
Some of our childhood friends are drowning in pools, and that's a terrible metaphor.
On that note, I'm just going to ask Phil Nicholson, if people want to find you, they can search you on Google?
Yeah, just do that. It's easiest.
He's also at Phil Nicholson on Twitter, and he has a vanity license plate on Google+. Kevin Mitchell, where are you?
You can still find me on Twitter at CrackBerryKevin, Instagram at CrackBerryKevin, and on CrackBerry.com.
Derek Kessler?
It turns out you can actually find me on Google as well, but I'm going to tell you I'm on Twitter as DKDSGN, and on app.net as just Kessler, and all over that whole Talk Mobile thing we've been doing.
Oh, so before we leave, give me a what's up on Talk Mobile. This is our last week.
This is our last week, and it is all about the mobile you. We're talking about really how do you prioritize what you're looking for in a smartphone? How do you pick the best smartphone tablet for you? How do you become famous online? Do you want to be famous online? How do you customize your phones? What options are there? What should be customized and what should just be left up to the manufacturer to do their thing? It's all about you.
And TalkMobile2013.com?
Yes.
Perfect. Daniel Rubino, where can we find you? Where can we find Windows Phone?
You can find me on Twitter at Daniel_Rubino, same thing on Instagram, and of course you can find me at WP Central, where I'll be writing every day.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie on all the social things. You can find me at iMore.com. You can find all of us at MobileNations.com and all of our shows. That's the CrackBerry Podcast, Android Central Podcast, WP Central Podcast, the iMore Show, and a whole bunch of other viewing and listening stuff for your pleasure. Kevin, it has been a hell of a year. We should do a podcast like this again maybe in a month or so.
Yeah, we'll do a looking back at 2013 and before the end of the year, absolutely.
All right, Mobile Nations?
Out!
Bye, everybody.